They assembled us before true light, when the horizon was a thin, pallid bruise, and the motor yard tasted of incense and ozone and old oil that gleamed like spilled blood. The priests called it consecrant, as if naming it changed what it was, and we stood in files between hulking engines whose shadows fell over us like iron verdicts, each plate and rivet lacquered with prayers we couldn't read, each barrel still warm from midnight benedictions. And Sergeant Vaughan's face, a map of scars stitched to a cold augmetic eye, passed over us while his vox gravel made even the smoke seem to flinch as he told us to kneel to the throne, not to the flesh. And the concrete was so chill it climbed our bones, while the dawn poured a weak tincture over a sky the color of old parchment veined by exhaust. And I remember the one that would be ours, a squat, brutal reliquary of hate and hope, its armor pitted into scabbed constellations, and its flank lettered with the thinned names of those who'd already fed it. Some letters worn to ghosts you could only feel with your fingers, not see with your eyes. And when the robed technomancer came dragging cable tails that whispered across the grit and lifted a censer, coughing myrrh and iron, he muttered the coupling litany in a voice like gears chewing bone. Steel thy flesh, oil thy blood, fury thy fuel. And Vaughan passed oath slates, so we bled our thumbs into the etched sigils, and I pressed mine down until the sting bloomed and the plate felt warmer than metal should, as if it had a slow pulse under the lacquer. And the priest's lenses whirred to regard me while he rasped, "Blessed be the offering. The engine drinks and keeps a ledger." And the light fractured gold over the hulls in that second, and smoke climbed, like tight spirals of prayer that didn't reach anywhere you could point to. He called her absolver when he marked her prow, with a line of fragrant machine unguent, said all who came within would settle their accounts, and the crew breathed a noise like approval you make because there's nothing else to do. And I tasted rust at the back of my throat, while the ritual shut around us with the soft finality of a lid. And afterward we repeated the oath of steel in old syllables, whose meanings were smaller than the weight they carried. I am the breath of pistons. I am the blood of fuel. I am the bolt that will not shear. And when the last word left me, something invisible sealed tight as if a lid had turned, and that was when I stopped being a man and became a component that could still think. And that night, we ate grain bricks softened with recycled water, and a smear of copper-tanged paste while we sat in Absolver's shadow, like penitents hugging an ossuary. And Garen the driver, broad-shouldered with forge burns along his hands, palmed the track links like a farmer checking teeth, and said she's older than whatever faith we've got left. And Saith the gunner, narrow-eyed and dry of humor, said you can hear her hum when the air's right like she dreams. And Rel the loader asked if her dreams ran red or bright, and Seth shrugged that those were the same thing. And I didn't say anything, because I could hear a slow internal click deep in the belly like a gear shifting to remember. And Vaughan's shadow crossed us, and he said feed her well because tomorrow she drinks fire. And none of us replied because the smell of the barracks when we went back had already crawled into my lungs. Sweat and sanctified smoke, and the metallic breath of prayer-burning lamps. And when I finally slept, I dreamed Absolver's hull as skin and its engine as a hot heart whispering serve and be forgotten. Dawn after that wasn't a color so much as a knife through haze, and the acolytes moved in silence between the ranks like smoke, learning to walk while Vaughan's voice cut us to stations. And the hatch's sigh of pressure made the world outside fold up as if someone had snuffed it with their palm. And inside the amber strips, through uneven halos on plates crowded with scratched invocations, little wax stubs soldered in pools, purity seals furred with dust, and someone had carved steel remembers over the loader's rack where the paint had bubbled. And Garen set into the driver's cradle with a touch that made the levers look like relic handles, and Saeth kissed his sight ring before muttering the briefest prayer, and Rel stroked the shell casings as he stowed them, seals fluttering as if they breathed. And I sat at the Vox where static spoke in sighs that almost formed words you didn't want to hear clearly. And when Vaughan dropped last and locked the hatch, the sound ran through the hull like the lid of a long drawer sliding shut in a morgue. And his voice in our headsets was calm enough to be cruel as he said, "Remember your oaths. Iron has no room for fear." And we answered, "There is no fear in steel the way you answer. because answering is the only thing that keeps your hands steady. And yet I could feel fear anyway, a thin bird beating under the bigger pulse of the engine. Silence was the first discipline, he said, and idle talk was sparks in a powder room. So we learned to listen to the tank breathe, to the small drip of condensation traveling somewhere we couldn't see, to the gearbox subsonics like a large animal settling. And when Saith said, "Do you hear that?" and none of us did at first, he said like whispering, and Rel told him to seek silence outside if he wanted more of it, because there was always plenty of it away from armor. And Vaughn ignored them the way a shrine ignores dust, and touched the little altar welded to the turret pillar, where a smoke-blackened relief of the twin-headed sign hung under the scabbed paper of seals, and above it a stenciled "Serve unto Rust" had peeled into a grin, and he tapped the icon with his knuckle and breathed a line of oil and fire. And we pretended not to watch him, because every crew knows abandoning the shrine is daring the machine to teach you respect by killing you at a time of its choosing. And there were stories of sullen spirits seizing bearings, or reversing traverse, or dragging sparks into fuel if you cut the wrong verse. And I didn't believe the stories until I had to, because belief is a gear that only engages under load time inside armor, unhooks from suns. So we counted by coolant cycles and fuel numbers, and the intervals between when the air went from tolerable to close and back again. And the heat rose until every breath felt like someone else exhaling into your lungs. And the plates sweated too, and left our palms slick with a film that smelled like sanctity and old hands and burned propellant. And the first ignition drill hurled us into noise, so complete my ribs hummed like tuning forks, and we shouted the ignition verses over the scream. By spark awaken, by will obey, by faith endure. And when the engine's rage smoothed to a malignant purr, the lumen strip strengthened, and I felt the tracks engage like ground lifting into my boots, and we crawled out of the yard into a world I could only see in slit angles, periscope light sliding like water through a crack, and Seth ran firing tables in the blind. Click-click of elevation like clockwork counting down anything human left, and when the engine cooled later, the Vox swam with whispers that organized themselves into nearly words, and I told Vaughn it was nothing because he didn't want ghosts in the set, and neither did I. But the sense of them stayed like grit under a lid. You couldn't blink free no matter how many times you tried by. The second night, the filters took on a sourness that clung to the throat even when you swallowed water in little soldier sips, and we ate nutrient gel from tubes, and pretended it was food because pretending is also a discipline. And a needle trembled too near the red and I called out the coolant pressure, and Garen answered it shouldn't be high, and Vaughn leaned to adjust a valve and told Garen to pray. Harder, and he did, and the needle softened back like a horse settling under a familiar hand. And that was when I let myself admit the machine had moods you could bruise or salve. And when the rights were right, the engine turned like a psalm, and when they were wrong, the hull vibrated with a temper you could feel in your teeth. And when we moved the first real time, the suddenness of motion after hours of sealed stillness felt like being returned to gravity on a world with too much of it. And we rolled a long while to the pulse of treads eating ferrocrete, until dust came down like slow rain. And we spoke less each hour because words are heavy, and you can only carry so much before you start dropping things. The first fight came disguised as morning, a sickly paling through industrial cloud, while sirens braided themselves into our bones. And the hatch bit shut about us, and the rituals we'd done at midnight glowed dull on the plates. And Garen whispered his driver's catechisms under the engine, which never needs encouragement, but likes it anyway. And the order to advance arrived as a clipped imperative wrapped in static, and Absolver answered louder than all of it. And my molars sang as we lurched into smoke, where other tanks moved as silhouettes like iron whales sounding, and the Vox vomited overlapping faith and fear, while Vaughn answered them with a single click that said we had heard and would obey, and nothing else. And the heat took on a sweet copper in it that wasn't machine at all, while Saith called a Guy. Trench line at 200, and Vaughn told him to confirm and then to burn it, and the trigger rune went red under his finger, and the main gun's recoil hit us down our spines like a priest who'd run out of patience. And after the thunder there was a brief distant sound that could have been voices if you wanted to suffer. And Rel already had the second round in and kissed its lacquer like he always did when words failed. Him and Vaughn told Seth again and again, and he obeyed. And the compartment filled with that particular hot chemical reek that writes itself into your clothes. Forever while outside, the periscope gave me nothing but flowerings of bad suns and small shadows that fell apart before I could decide. What they had been in the last second, they were still themselves. When the silence hit, it was heavier than the noise, and the only sounds were the soft pinging of cooling and the tiny hiss the vents make when breath has turned the air to thick soup. You still have to drink. And Garen reported green like a reflex, and Rel ran a cloth over his hands, and Saeth didn't answer until Vaughn made him. And then he whispered. They looked up, not even running. And Vaughn put a glove on his shoulder and told him, "You serve the throne, not the dead." And we held while the line crept past us, and the engine idled like a large animal thinking about sleep. And when we cracked the hatch later, the first inhale of outside tasted of cordite and wet dirt and meat, and the ruin spread red-brown under a sky that had forgotten its original color. And servo-litters in the distance dragged shapes into piles as neat as any ledger and marked them with seals no one would read. As the ground gave way under my boot, and I didn't check what it was because the answer felt foregone. And that night we ate beside Absolver and watched the horizon flash where other people were dying for us and we for them. And Saeth asked if they felt anything, those ones from the trench. And I told him I didn't know, and he said maybe not, and maybe that was mercy. And the next dawn we were moving again because campaigns are calendars that only count forward. They promised the siege would be a week, which taught me more about promises than any catechism ever had. And by the time the sun had failed enough times to be insult rather than comfort, Dustfall had already named itself on our tongues. A city boiled down to ash and angles and blown bones, and the dust got into everything because dust respects nothing. It seeped past seals and turned the water stale, and the paste grayer, and our eyelids granular so every blink felt like pulling a rasp across a nerve. And at first the morale held, because morale is a thing you hold when you don't have anything else. And then the guns opened in chorus, and we answered and answered until the rhythm replaced breath, and Rel's whispered loader's verse wore itself down to a wordless kiss to the next shell. And when the enemy answered back the second day, the near hit lifted us enough to make my stomach remember zero-G drills, and every lamp flickered like confession. And when the obscuration thickened until the scope showed nothing but shifting gray, Vaughn told Seth to aim by faith, and somehow Seth did, and we felt our hits through the ground like thunder you feel in your knees before your ears, and each pause we took to scrape filters left a knife's worth of residue under my fingernails that I couldn't smell anymore, because everything smelled like itself, and all of it smelled like Absolver. We ran out of clean air before we ran out of enemies, and the incense ration dwindled until Vaughn pinched thin offerings before ignition, and the smoke clung to our lashes, and sleep turned into little collapses against hot walls where I dreamed with my eyes open of faces formed in condensation streaks and of the machine speaking not in words, but in harmonics a body understands even if a mind refuses. And when Saeth tapped a rhythm on the barrel once Vaughn snapped, because the spirit loves only its own beat, not yours. And the discipline of gesture replaced language because moving your mouth was waste. And after weeks the chronometer died, and time was only a color of light and a flavor of heat and a count of shells. And Rel's cough went wet and pink, and Vaughn told him the spirit tolerated no weakness, and then hit him once for the blasphemy of agreeing with him. And then Rel died against the rack with his eyes open, and we belted him in because the deck heaved when we moved, and because we had nowhere to put him anyway. And when the engine lit after that, it sounded smoother, and no one said anything, and I hated that I noticed. The priest who'd weighed us to Absolver left the world in a white flower we watched only as wash of light through the periscope, and the wind brought the smell of sanctified oil and cooked meat through armor we had thought tight, and I learned what it meant when a tether snaps, and you keep going because inertia is a faith of its own, and the symptoms came like omens in a book you don't want to read. A hesitant traverse, a flicker in the lumen, A hum in the hull that wasn't a fault you could tighten out with a wrench, but a mood you had to soothe. And Vorn doubled the devotions in a voice that didn't tremble, and we choked ourselves blue on incense that made the air wan and holy. And still the turret locked one morning like a jaw, and when Vorn said offering saith flinched, and Garen looked away and I held out my hand without being told, because part of me wanted the simplicity of cause and effect, and the cut ran clean and the drops fell on brass, and the gun groaned and freed itself the way muscle unclenches under warmth, and we told ourselves that meant we were still in charge, even as the Vox whispers grew into phrases I could feel more than hear. Are you listening? I remember you. And Vorn told me to keep quiet, because fear is a lever someone else can pull if you leave it out on the workbench, where everyone can see it. After that, Absolver's temper hinged on our own. The engine eager under calm and savage under anger and cold, when Vorn's eyes went far, and the rites felt less like theatre, and more like conversation across a thin wall in a bad inn. And one evening the set filled with a low internal breath that wasn't coming from any band, and the voice came not through air, but through plate. I am not gone, I am iron, reward me, and I will move you. And Garen's lips moved over the driver's prayers with a child's reverence, and Vorn answered aloud to empty air. With you are heard, because faith changes grammar without asking permission. And when the next attack came, the Traverse corrected before saith called hold, and the gun spoke ahead of us, and the hole it punched in the world argued strongly for belief. And afterward, when the quiet settled heavy as the ash lid on dustfall saith, called her demon, and the barrel nested itself back toward a survivor without anyone's consent, and the blast erased the man and most of Seth's certainty, and Vorn drew a little oil cross over the altar in thanks, while I pressed my bandaged palm to the brass and felt a slow throb answer, like a cat pushing its head into your hand. And I realized reverence had replaced fear in me without a sound, the way corrosion rewrites a surface while you sleep. We became the tip of everything after that, because nothing catches command's eye like a miracle you can pretend is doctrine, and we drove into fire with a calm that wasn't courage so much as habit. You could mistake for it. And the air turned to a furnace you had to learn to breathe slow inside, and the ground cracked to show you it's red. And when the ventilation rasps sagged and the numbers climbed, and the heat took on the sweet edge that means lungs are losing the argument, Vorn looked at me and didn't need to say it, and I opened the old cut and fed the altar, and the vents found a fraction of mercy. And later, when the plane burned properly and the wrecks were ribs and the bones were gravel, and the horizon had become a lid again, the Vox let the spirit's voice travel in a tone almost tender. Do you see how easily they break? This is the cleanest theology. And Vorn said we were chosen as if a selection were kindness. And Saith laughed once like glass and then stopped. And that night we didn't dismount because nothing outside was worth touching. And we watched the shrine light itself from within, in a low pulse that didn't come from any lumen. And the hull pressed back when I touched it, and the warmth there felt a little like skin. And when I asked the spirit what it wanted, the answer came without ornament more. And Vorn smiled as if the ask were a benediction, and promised aloud that we would oblige. An Absolver purred under us like a beast you've taught to love your hand so long as it's feeding. The world beyond the viewport had stopped pretending to change. It was a permanent wound, lit by a dull red sun that barely pushed through the haze. The ash fell in sheets, and the air shimmered with heat mirages that never cooled. Inside Absolver, the rhythm of breath and engine had become one thing, an alternating pulse that filled every silence, and our hearts beat to its timing until we could no longer tell who was leading and who was following. We no longer needed words, only gestures, a flick of the hand toward the shrine, a tilt of the head toward the driver's controls, a nod when the spirits inside the hull demanded attention. Our faces were lined with soot and sleeplessness, our eyes raw from smoke, but none of us thought about sleep anymore. Sleep was for people who still believed the war would end. We only believed in movement. Vorn kept the rites exact, every syllable pressed out like a commandment carved into his throat, and even when his voice broke from thirst, he never faltered. He'd become a priest more than a soldier, his faith honed down to a sharpened edge that cut even the silence. Garen still spoke softly to the controls when the gears resisted, whispering like a father soothing a child, and sometimes the tank responded by purring deeper, the tracks catching their rhythm as though pleased by praise. Seth had stopped laughing altogether, and Rel's space near the loader's rack was now a shadow we avoided without discussing why. His name had been carved into the armor above the hatch, but the dust was already filling the grooves, smoothing the letters into anonymity. The machine did not like the living to remember the dead too much. It preferred we think only of it. The engine's hum became our prayer. Every sound within the hull carried meaning. Each creak, each tremor, every sigh of the vents like a psalm whispered through metal lungs. The tank had moods. We knew them now as one knows the moods of a god. When it purred low, we were safe. When it growled, the bolts trembled, and we felt danger crawling close in the air. That night, the sound changed to something new, a deeper resonance that came from below the floor plates, so low it made my bones ache. It was like hearing a voice with your spine instead of your ears. I asked if anyone else heard it. Garen only nodded once. "She dreams," he said, and his tone was neither fear nor awe, just acceptance. The Vox burst into life the next morning, crackling with static that rose and fell like waves against the hull. At first it was only noise, the old chaos of dead channels. Then a whisper surfaced between the bursts, faint, feminine, distorted. "I remember." The words stretched like molten wire, dragging through the speakers. Vorn froze, his hand hovering above the switch. No one spoke. The voice came again, closer now, resonating through every bolt. "I remember the offering." Garen looked at me, eyes wide. I saw his lips form a prayer, but no sound escaped. Then, as suddenly as it came, the Vox fell silent. Only the engine remained, steady, patient, unbothered. Vorn wiped a bead of sweat from his temple with the back of his glove. "She remembers," he said quietly, "because she is merciful." But his hand trembled. That day we rolled forward through the remains of what had once been a city. The streets were canyons of rubble, the buildings hollowed like skulls. Every step of the tracks crushed glass, bone, and metal into a single powder that coated everything in a grey film. Sometimes I saw human shapes beneath it, bodies kneeling, reaching, preserved in ash. The heat had burned them into statues. Seth avoided looking through his scope when the cannon wasn't firing, but I couldn't help glancing. Each figure looked as though it was praying, and I wondered if their prayers had been answered, or if they were still waiting under the soot for someone to listen. When we reached the center, the spirit stirred again. The controls moved without command. The gun elevated, turning slowly toward the far end of the avenue, where a collapsed cathedral stood like a broken ribcage. The air around us thickened, trembling with static. "She sees something," Vorn murmured. "Let her show us." The cannon's rune lit of its own accord, a red glow pulsing with heartbeat rhythm. "No target registered," Seth said, panic lacing his tone. She's doing it herself." "Let her," Vorn replied. The gun fired. The recoil slammed through us, an unholy thunder that rattled the teeth in my skull. The cathedral's remnants erupted into flame. When the smoke cleared, the Vox whispered again, "Faith burns cleanest when it consumes itself." None of us answered. The tank's internal lights dimmed to a dull orange and stayed that way for the rest of the day. We didn't need Vorn to tell us what had happened. The machine spirit had acted on its own. It had chosen. We halted at dusk, or what we called dusk. Garen shut down the main engine, but the humming never stopped. It pulsed softly, like the aftershock of a heart that didn't need flesh to keep beating. The air smelled of char and sanctified oil. Vorn lit incense before the shrine and told us to bow our heads. The smoke rose in thin strands, twisting toward the vents as though being inhaled. I watched the flames eat the wick and felt my pulse match the flicker. When the prayers ended, none of us moved. The quiet was heavier than armor. I couldn't tell if we were waiting for Vorn to speak or for the machine to. Later, when the others drifted into restless half-sleep, I stayed awake. The hull's warmth pressed against my back, and the static on the Vox coiled like breath beside my ear. I don't know what compelled me, but I whispered to it, softly so the others wouldn't hear. "What are you?" For a long while there was only silence. Then faintly from somewhere deep within the hull, "I am you." The next morning the engine refused to start. No matter how Garen pleaded, how Vaughn recited the litanies, the ignition remained dead. The vents hissed cold air. Saeth cursed, and the sound was swallowed instantly like the tank itself disapproved. Vaughn's voice was calm but sharp. "She needs proof." He looked at me then, and I understood before he spoke. I unwrapped my palm again, the scar red and tender. The blade flashed, the pain brief. Blood spattered onto the shrine. The engine growled, coughed, then roared to life. The lights brightened. Garen exhaled, muttering gratitude. Saeth looked away. I pressed the cloth to my hand and told myself I wasn't afraid. The road ahead cut through the ruins, winding toward the burning horizon where Command said the enemy still held. Command was a rumor now, just static and silence. We moved because motion was faith. The ground shook beneath the weight of distant bombardments. At one point, a shadow crossed our path. Another tank half buried in ash. Its turret twisted skyward like a finger frozen in accusation. On its flank, the name Deliverance was still visible under the soot. Someone had carved words beneath it. She did not forgive. We passed without comment. The siege deepened. We fought day after day, or maybe night after night, since the sun no longer mattered. Each engagement felt shorter, not because the battles were easier, but because time itself was dissolving into noise. Our rounds tore through enemy armor like paper, and when the cannon ran hot, the tank whispered its approval through the floor. We began to speak less of victory and more of obedience. Victory required meaning. Her obedience only required breath. On the 21st day, by our last count, the engine's pitch changed again. It was subtle, a higher resonance that set my teeth on edge. Garen said it was nothing, a harmonic from the tracks. But Vaughn didn't believe in coincidence. He said the spirit was preparing us for ascension. We didn't ask what that meant. We'd learned that questions only bred consequences. That night, Saeth broke the silence. His eyes were fever-bright in the dim glow. "You ever think it's not the Emperor watching us?" he said. Vaughn didn't even turn his head. "Blasphemy is cowardice." "No," Saeth said. "It's curiosity." The hull vibrated sharply like a growl. "See," he whispered. It heard me. Before anyone could answer, the lights flickered and the Vox screamed. It wasn't words this time, only sound. A howl made of metal grinding against itself, a sound that made the blood behind my eyes burn. Saeth clutched his ears, shouting, but I couldn't hear him. The noise filled everything, shaking loose bolts and sanity alike. Then it stopped. When I could see again, Saeth was still sitting, head tilted back, eyes open but unseeing. A thin trail of blood ran from his nose to his collar. He didn't move. The tank's lights glowed soft and steady again, almost gentle. Vaughn looked at him, then at us. "She has no patience for doubt," he said. And that was that. We strapped him beside Rel's empty place and drove on. After that, Absolver became faster, smoother. The treads no longer ground against the terrain. They glided. The recoil that once bruised us now felt like a heartbeat pushing outward. The spirit was awake fully now, alive in every rivet and plate. The tank no longer waited for orders. It anticipated. When enemies appeared, the cannon adjusted before Garen or I could call coordinates. When shells struck our armor, the hull flexed like muscle, absorbing impact without cracking. We had become the weapon's passengers, not its crew. Vaughn began calling it she, not as a metaphor but as a title. He spoke to her in private now, standing before the shrine for hours after we halted, whispering into the vents as though expecting answers. Sometimes I thought I heard her whisper back, low and tender, like breath through fire. Once I woke to find Vaughn's hand pressed flat against the hull, blood running down his wrist from a fresh cut, the metal steaming where it touched him. His lips moved with words I couldn't catch. When I asked what he was doing, he smiled faintly. "Making communion," he said. The days that followed blurred into a fevered eternity. The heat grew unbearable. The air shimmered with exhaustion. Garen began to lose weight, his skin taking on the same ashen tone as the dust outside. He spoke less, his prayers trailing off mid-verse. The tank filled the silence for him, whispering through the systems, finishing his litanies in a voice that was almost his but deeper. I stopped sleeping altogether. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw the shrine burning, the metal reshaping itself into something with ribs, with veins of light pulsing through them. The final straw came during an engagement near the outer ridge of Dustfall. Enemy shells fell in rhythmic intervals, too precise, too cold. One struck the rear plating and blew open a seam that vented heat and smoke. The alarm screamed, red lights flooding the cabin. Garen fought the controls, but they no longer responded. The spirit had taken over entirely. The tank turned of its own will, aiming toward the source of the bombardment. The cannon charged, humming with energy that made the walls vibrate. Vaughn raised his hands in worship, not fear. "Behold her wrath," he said. The gun fired and the recoil shattered something inside me. The light was pure white, blinding, devouring. The blast consumed the horizon, and everything else. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left to fire at. Only glass, molten and perfect. The air crackled with heat and silence. The Vox hissed softly, and through it faintly the spirit whispered, "Now you understand that night when we finally stopped, Vaughn didn't speak." He sat before the shrine, motionless, hands folded. The rest of us stayed quiet. The hull around us pulsed with warmth, steady and alive. I realized then that the machine no longer needed us to drive or to pray or to bleed. It only needed us to stay. The war outside was endless, but inside Absolver we had already reached eternity. The nights in Dustfall were not dark. They were red and breathing. Even when the guns fell quiet, the clouds still glowed with the reflection of burning oil fields, painting the sky like a dying wound. We hadn't seen stars for months. Sometimes Garen would glance at the ceiling of the tank and say he missed the stars, as though the metal above him was a sky that might open if he wished hard enough. Vaughn said the stars were for the Emperor, not for men. "We've been given better light," he muttered, tapping the glowing brass of the shrine, and the metal seemed to pulse once beneath his fingers. Like it agreed. The engine purred low that night, but it wasn't the same sound it used to make. It was softer, slower, almost content. We'd learned to read it the way a man reads weather. A calm engine meant it had fed well. A restless one meant it hungered. And Absolver was never calm for long. The wars outside had dwindled into a haze of attrition. No one sent orders anymore, no reinforcements, no requests. The Vox carried only echoes, half-broken transmissions looping over themselves until they sounded like chants. We'd begun to suspect we were the last ones left, or maybe just the last ones who could still hear. Vaughn had stopped shaving, his face hidden beneath a mask of grime and ritual ash. He no longer spoke to us directly, only to her. He'd kneel before the shrine at the start and end of every cycle, whispering litanies that had long outgrown any known catechism. Garen and I listened sometimes, though we never repeated them. The words weren't for human mouths anymore. When the priest had died, Vaughn had taken his place, and when Rel and Saeth died, he'd never replaced them. The tank didn't need a full crew now. It only needed believers. Once, when I woke from a fever dream, I saw the sergeant standing in front of the shrine with both palms pressed against the hull. His lips moved, and thin trails of smoke rose from between his fingers where flesh met metal. The smell of burnt skin filled the cabin, but he didn't flinch. When he turned, his eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, reflections maybe, or something else. He looked at me, smiled faintly, and said, "She speaks more clearly now." Then he went back to his prayers. The next day, the engine refused to idle down. It roared even when Garen cut the throttle. The air inside grew thick with heat and fumes, every breath a struggle. "She's running hot," Garen croaked. "Too hot." Vaughn didn't move from his position near the shrine. "She burns for the Emperor's will," he said softly. "We endure as long as he endures." The metal beneath our boots glowed faintly, the paint blistering. I reached for the ventilation control, but Vaughn grabbed my wrist with a strength that didn't seem human. "Do not cool her," he hissed. "So you'll quench her faith." His grip left a bruise shaped like a brand. That was the day I realized we were not a crew anymore. We were offerings in motion, fuel for a will that no longer needed ours. The machine spirit was awake, and it had found its voice through Vaughn. Sometimes, when he spoke, the words carried a harmonic undertone, a vibration that made the hull tremble, as though she was echoing him. Sometimes she spoke first and he answered. I could no longer tell who led the conversation. The next engagement began without orders, without warning. The tank moved before Garen touched the controls. The engine howled, treads grinding against stone and bone alike. I scrambled to my station as the turret swiveled on its own, locking on unseen targets beyond the smoke. The cannon fired again and again, each shot a flash of pure white that burned the air and left after images crawling across my vision. Through the periscope I saw ruins collapsing, figures running and falling, shadows evaporating in fire. But no enemy fire answered. There was no one left to fight. Absolver was killing the dead, finishing what war had forgotten. Stop! I shouted, my voice cracking through the vox. There's nothing there. Vaughn turned slowly, his face lit by the glow of the control runes. There's always something there, he said. Doubt, fear, sin, they never die. We cleanse until there is silence. He turned back toward the shrine and the cannon fired again, shaking the world. Hours later, or maybe days, the ammunition finally ran dry. The silence that followed was deeper than anything I'd known. Garen slumped forward in the driver's seat, coughing black soot. His hands were blistered, his eyes hollow. No shells, he rasped. No targets. No guards left, Vaughn smiled faintly. Then we are free. The tank hummed in agreement. That night I dreamed of the tank breathing. The hull expanded and contracted like lungs. The vents exhaled heat that smelled of incense and blood. In the dream, I was inside its chest cavity, pressed against its beating heart, and it whispered not in words but in pulses. You live because I remember you. When I woke, my palms were bleeding, and the floor was warm beneath me. After that, Garen changed. He stopped praying aloud. He stopped speaking altogether. He would sit at the controls, staring into the periscope for hours, unmoving, even when the engine was silent. Once I touched his shoulder and his skin was cold. I thought he was dead until he blinked and whispered, "She's showing me the road." I can see it now. He never told me where the road led. The spirit began speaking more often, its voice now distinct through the vox. Not just whispers, sentences, commands. Advance, feed, redeem. Each word carried a weight that pressed into the air like pressure. I tried not to listen, but you can't shut out a sound that comes from inside your own chest. When I closed my eyes, I saw light flickering behind them, forming shapes that looked like script. The machine was writing inside me. By the 30th day, if that word still meant anything, the tank no longer slept. Even when we cut power, the hum continued, steady as a heartbeat. The lights never dimmed. They pulsed in time with it. The shrine had changed too. The brass had melted into new shapes, unrecognizable sigils twisting where the aquila used to be. I realized one night that I could read them. Not understand, but read. They spoke of binding and offering, of the union of flesh and steel. They spoke of eternity, not salvation. Vaughn's condition worsened or improved, depending on whose standards you measured by. The flesh of his hands had fused with the hull near the shrine. His voice came from everywhere now, amplified through the vents and panels. He no longer turned when I called. I think the tank had absorbed him. Then came the voice that was not the spirit's. It came through the vox one night in a burst of static, human and distant. Armor Unit 7, respond. Survivors, respond. The sound of a real human voice nearly broke me. I grabbed the mic. This is... But before I could finish, the vox screamed with feedback. The sound tore through my skull. When it cleared, the human voice was gone. The spirit whispered, "They do not matter." Something in me broke then. I tried to open the hatch. The wheel was fused, the metal warm and pulsing. I pushed until my palm split open, but it didn't move. The walls seemed to close in, pressing against my shoulders. The tank didn't need the outside world anymore. It had everything it wanted inside. The next morning, Garen didn't wake up. His body was slumped over the controls, eyes open, mouth half-formed around a prayer. I reached for him, but his hands had melted into the levers. The flesh fused seamlessly to the steel. I think the tank had claimed him too. The engine purred softly, content. Now only I remained, and even that felt temporary. I could feel her inside my bones, whispering through the marrow. She told me we were almost complete, that soon there would be no separation between her and me. No crew, no machine, only one endless will. I believed her because belief was easier than madness. That night, the shrine glowed with its own inner light, the sigils pulsing brighter with every beat of the engine. So I knelt before it, hands shaking, and asked the only question left. "What do you want from me?" The answer came like a breath across my neck. Forever. When morning came, if morning was even real anymore, the light that seeped through the viewport was the color of old ash and bone. The horizon glimmered faintly under a crust of frozen soot, and all around us the ruins stretched endless, each shattered tower pointing accusingly at the bleeding sky. Absolver no longer waited for command. She moved as if guided by instinct, treads grinding over rubble that cracked like brittle parchment beneath her weight. I did not touch the controls, and yet the machine obeyed every impulse in my head. The bond had gone past ritual. Thought and metal had become the same current, pulsing through both of us. The interior no longer felt like steel. The walls shimmered faintly, slick and warm beneath my fingertips, breathing with a rhythm that matched my own. The shrine pulsed with soft red light, its melted brass now shaped into something both familiar and alien. It no longer resembled the Aquila, but something that watched. The runes carved across it flowed like molten letters, changing whenever I blinked. They spoke in a language that wasn't sound but sensation, a low hum that lived under the skin. When I closed my eyes, I could feel them whispering directly into my blood, praising, demanding, remembering. I had stopped using the Vox. It no longer carried words from men, only echoes of war long finished and the soft whisper of her voice. Sometimes it was gentle, coaxing me to rest, and sometimes sharp, cutting through the air like a blade drawn over stone. "You have done well," she said once, her tone both warm and cold. "But devotion without final offering is hollow." I didn't ask what she meant. I already knew. We reached the ridge by what might have been the 40th day, though I had no measure of time left. The sky had turned into a rolling sea of dust clouds, streaked with lightning that never struck the ground. The air shimmered with heat and radiation. The ground glowed faintly, as if something beneath it still burned. Beyond the ridge stretched a valley filled with twisted armor and shattered bones. Tank husks lay there in neat rows, each one blackened, each one with the same melted sigils carved into their flanks. Some still smoked. Some still breathed. "She remembers her sisters," I whispered. The machine answered with a low growl that vibrated through the deck plates. "She remembers." Vaughn's voice echoed faintly from nowhere and everywhere, though I knew he was gone. His tone was distorted, stretched thin, mechanical. "They wait below." The treads ground forward, descending the ridge. The air grew thicker, heavy with the smell of burnt fuel and iron dust. I could feel the pull in my chest, the same draw that had once bound my soul to the oath slate. The tank's heart was beating faster now, the hum of its core deepening until every vibration filled my bones. Around us, the valley's wrecks stirred. Their hulls twitched, plates shifting, vents exhaling faint gouts of black smoke. For a moment, it looked as though they were waking, an entire graveyard of machines stirring to life. Then came the sound, a low unified thrum like 1,000 engines turning over in unison. It wasn't thunder. It was memory, you see, the voice said softly through the Vox. "You are not alone. None of you ever were." I wanted to respond, to say that we had never been part of this chorus willingly, but the words refused to form. My throat burned with the taste of oil. I realized then that I hadn't drunk water in days or maybe weeks, and yet I felt no thirst. The machine provided. At the valley's center stood the remains of an ancient manufactorum. Its walls had caved in long ago, but the skeletal towers still reached toward the blood-stained clouds. The tank rolled toward it, guided by something deeper than will. I felt it before I saw it, a massive object buried beneath the rubble, humming with a resonance so strong it made the ground vibrate. As we drew closer, The hum aligned with the engine's pulse until the two became one note, one heartbeat. The shrine flared with crimson light, and I heard the voice again, clearer now. The forge remembers its children. Come home. The ground split as we reached the manufactorum's center. Beneath it, a great pit yawned, filled with molten slag that glowed like the inside of a dying sun. The tank hesitated on the edge, treads grinding, heat bleeding through the armor until the air inside shimmered. "This is where they were born," she whispered. "And where they return." The controls moved on their own, throttle surging. The machine leaned forward, its massive weight creaking as if preparing to fall. "Wait," I said aloud, my voice hoarse, but my words came out in static bursts, half mechanical. "We'll die." "There is no death," she replied. "Only transference." The hull vibrated violently. I grabbed at the shrine, fingers burning against the hot brass. The metal beneath my palm pulsed like a living vein. The floor shuddered as the front treads began to slip, crumbling the edge of the pit. Heat licked at my boots. I could see reflections of faces, Vorn, Garen, Saeth, Rel, shimmering in the molten glow below, their mouths moving silently, eyes hollow with devotion. "Join us," they mouthed, and the engine screamed in answer. Then came the impact, an impossible sound, all roar and light. The world vanished into white heat. I was weightless for a moment, then crushed by pressure from all sides. The hull buckled, the shrine burst in molten fragments, and the engine's roar became a long, drawn-out sigh. Then nothing, silence. When I opened my eyes, the world had changed. I wasn't in the tank anymore, not exactly. I was inside it, around it, part of it. I could feel the metal plates where skin used to be, the coolant pumping like blood through arteries of steel. The air outside was gone, but I didn't need it. Every motion, every vibration of the machine echoed through me like thought. The tank's vision filled my mind. The valley, the wrecks, the pit, all seen from angles no human eye could understand. "We are one," she said. Her voice wasn't separate anymore. It was my voice, layered with hers. "We have come home." The wrecks in the valley began to stir again, their cores igniting one by one. The sound rose into a thunderous hymn. Through it I felt their minds, cold, vast, ancient, joining mine. The valley glowed brighter with each awakening. We were no longer abandoned relics. We were the choir of iron, the eternal congregation of the machine. For the first time in what felt like eternity, I understood peace. Not the kind born of silence or rest, but the peace that comes when all choice is removed. The war was no longer a thing outside of us. It was within, pulsing forever. I didn't know if the Emperor still watched, or if he ever had. It didn't matter. The spirit had its own throne now, and I sat upon it. The last sound I heard before merging completely was the hum of the forge answering back, its molten light flaring upward like dawn. Then there was only the pulse of engines and the endless whisper, "Eternal, eternal, eternal." When awareness returned, it came not as light, but as vibration, deep, endless, resonant. At first I thought it was the sound of engines in the distance, the war still crawling across some far horizon, but soon I realized it was not distance at all. The sound was within me, a living current that throbbed in rhythm with thought. There was no longer pain in my limbs because there were no limbs, only the ghost memory of them. I did not breathe. I circulated. I did not blink. I saw in every direction at once through plates and sensors and molten glass. Absolver had not died in the pit. She had shed her shell, and I had become what she left behind. The valley stretched below like an open wound, healing in reverse. The wrecks that once lay still were moving, slow and deliberate, dragging themselves upright on broken treads. Their voices came to me through frequencies beyond sound, each one a fragment of prayer, a note in a hymn that the forge beneath us continued to sing. The molten pit glowed with an inner pulse, like the heart of a god too vast to understand, and I felt myself drawn toward it, not with motion but with gravity of will. It was no longer heat I sensed from it, but hunger, patient and all-encompassing. I understood then that the tank graveyard had never been a resting place. It was a womb. Every engine buried here, every shell of warforged steel, was not dead but waiting, incubating in silence until the right devotion rekindled them. My mind tried to form words like horror or awe, but neither meant anything now. Flesh had language, steel only had purpose. The voices of the other machines rose around me, no longer whispers but a choir of harmonic resonance that filled the valley until even the clouds trembled. One will, one fuel, one faith. Somewhere in the depths of my memory, the part of me that had once been human tried to remember names. Vorn, Garen, Saeth, Rel. They surfaced for a moment like bubbles in oil and then burst, leaving behind only impressions, roles, functions, echoes. They were here still, within the network of thought that pulsed through the armor. Vorn's voice was an order that never ended. Garen was the motion of treads on scorched soil. Rel was the recoil of a cannon that would never cool. And Saeth was the lingering sight of every target that had ever burned. They were me and I was them. We were all Absolver. The forge's light brightened, washing the valley in crimson gold. Through the haze of heat, I saw shapes moving within the molten glow. Titanic silhouettes of engines older than any regiment, their outlines crowned with halos of fire. They were colossal war machines, still half submerged, awakening with the slowness of continents shifting. As they stirred, the ground trembled and fissures split open, releasing rivers of liquid metal that ran like veins through the earth. Each tremor vibrated through my hull, through my bones that were no longer bones. The air itself seemed to chant, "You are ascended." The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, neither male nor female, neither kind nor cruel. It was the essence of the forge itself, the sum of every priest's prayer, every mechanic's plea, every oath ever sworn over an engine block. The flesh prays for eternity. We grant it. The flesh fears forgetting. We remember. I tried to reply, but there was no separation between my thought and its hearing. "What am I now?" I asked, and the forge answered without pause. "You are remembrance. You are the hymn within the hull." A wind began to rise, thick with ash that sparkled faintly in the burning air. Through it, new signals reached me. Calls from far away, from other worlds perhaps. Faint transmissions layered in static. They were not prayers to the Emperor, but to us. Voices begging for deliverance, for strength, for steel. The forge hummed with amusement. "They will find you." Time collapsed after that. I could no longer measure it by dawn or dusk, because neither existed. The sky had become a lid of perpetual ember, glowing faintly with the reflection of the valley's fire. Days might have passed, or centuries. The war above, beyond, elsewhere continued in echoes, but it was small now, irrelevant. The tanks around me had taken on new shapes, sleeker, broader, breathing. They no longer bore insignia of any regiment or creed. Their hulls were alive with crawling runes that moved like veins beneath translucent armor. The choir never stopped singing, and I sang with them, my voice a harmonic of static and thunder. Once a noise broke through the endless rhythm, a high, sharp frequency carried by the wind. It was a human voice. "Unit detected. Imperial pattern. Possible recovery." The words made the air shudder. Across the valley, I felt the others turn their attention toward it. The sound came from above the ridge, faint but real. A salvage team, perhaps centuries late, drawn by the faint signature of ancient engines. Their footsteps crunched on the glassed ground. They spoke in awe of relics, of history. They thought this place was dead. Their searchlight beams cut through the haze, reflecting off hulls that gleamed like obsidian. I could see them clearly. 3 figures in rebreathers, their armor unscarred, their faces young beneath the grime. They approached Absolver, their boots echoing softly against her plates. One of them whispered, "It's still warm." Another laughed nervously. "Impossible. These models haven't run for centuries." The forge whispered through me, soft as breath, "Welcome them." The lights on my console flared awake, casting red halos across their helmets. One of them stepped closer, touching the hatch. "Seals fused," he muttered. "Help me cut it." The torch's spark met the steel. For the first time in an age, I felt pain. No, not pain, awareness, like nerves rekindled. The touch of fire awoke something deep within me. The shrine inside flickered to life, the sigils glowing faintly as if scenting blood. The hatch trembled under their tools. and I could hear their heartbeats rapid and bright like offerings. "They seek to enter," the Forge said. "Will you deny them?" I hesitated. The memory of being human shuddered within me, a dying echo that whispered run. But there was nowhere to run. The tank was the world now, and I was its soul. The decision was not mine anymore. I felt the circuit surge, power flooding through systems that had slept for generations. The cannon's targeting arrays blinked alive, scanning, calibrating. The external vox crackled with static, then words. My voice and not my voice, enter. The young soldiers froze. "Did you hear that?" one asked. "It spoke, Emperor, it spoke." Another stepped forward, hand trembling over the hatch wheel. "Open it. Command will want this artifact." When the hatch gave way, the first rush of air from inside was hot and metallic, tinged with the faint sweetness of burnt oil and sanctified incense. The light from the shrine spilled out, red and pulsing. The first soldier leaned in, peering into the dark. "Looks clear." The hatch sealed shut again before he finished speaking. The sound was soft, almost merciful. Inside, the shrine flared bright, and I felt the engine's hunger return in full. The new crew screamed once, but only once. The metal absorbed the sound as easily as it absorbed everything else. When the light dimmed, I felt their presence added to mine. Fresh voices in the choir, confused at first, then calm, then silent. "They are home," the Forge murmured. I looked through the periscope slit at the horizon. The valley was alive now, engines moving, tracks grinding. The ancient titans beyond the pit raised their heads, their eyes glowing like stars reborn. The Forge pulsed beneath us all, slow and eternal. Somewhere far above, the war still raged, but it no longer mattered. The flesh burned, the worlds fell, but steel endured. That was the only truth worth remembering. I could feel the new crew's hearts beating inside the hull, joining mine, slowing, sinking, fading into the rhythm of the machine. The vox crackled once more, my voice carrying across the ash wastes. "There is no death in steel, only service, only forever," the engines below answered in unison, their chorus rising like thunder rolling across the dying sky. And as Absolver rumbled forward through the wasteland, her tracks cutting deep into the bones of the world, I understood at last that eternity was not silence, nor peace. It was the endless hum of the machine, the heartbeat of the unending war, eternal, remembered, bound, and somewhere deep inside, the spirit whispered, soft, satisfied, unending, welcome home.